Welcome to the BOOMCLAP podcast, where culture and conviction collide. Today we have a great conversation for you with Joey Odom from Aro. Super excited to get into that with you. A statistic he throws out, I'm just going to throw it out right here at the beginning because I was really shocked by this. He said 91% of people spend 24 hours a day with their phone. And I'm like, what? 91% of people, 24 hours a day. Made me feel just a little bit better about my relationship with my phone, even though I know there are many ways I could improve. Like I really know I could do better. So this is a necessary conversation, obviously, just by that statistic.
I feel like this is the kind of conversation that needs to be heard and discussed with some urgency. Like as you'll hear in this conversation, like we don't like to think about this, but time is short, right? Time is shorter than any of us realize. And I don't remember what the statistic is, but for how long the average person spends at a red light, it's like a staggering amount of hours over the course of their lifetime. But I would hazard a guess that much less of us are spending that much time at red lights as compared to how much time we're spending on our phones.
Oh yeah.
So it's just, it's a necessary conversation, especially for parents who are raising kids who just want to do things differently and intentionally. It's convicting. It's convicting
and it's
the
practical.
whole way through. Very practical.
And it's practical. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, good. I very, very, very much enjoyed. I can't emphasize enough talking with him today. I felt like it was uplifting and convicting at the same time. So next week, we're going to have an election conversation. The election is coming up in America very quickly. And from conversations I'm having online, the voter demographic may be evolving a little bit and people having different feelings about whether they should vote or whether it even matters. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week, one way or the other. So I'm excited for that. I think that's also a necessary conversation. Totally. Before we get into the podcast with Joey, though, I do want to remind you, please go leave us a review. It goes a long way on helping Apple, helping Spotify, like push the podcast out to new listeners. Just leaving us a written review or a 5-star review. Either one of those help a lot. And also just passing it along to a friend. Send to a friend your favorite episode. Tell them about the BOOMCLAP podcast. We really, really appreciate that.
This conversation with Joey is all about the relationships we have with our phones and how, if we're not intentional about it, that relationship can get in the way of our more important human family relationships. So if you want to try the solution that Joey and Aro have created, you can try their app by going to goaro.link/boomclap. That's goaro.link/boomclap.
Hi, Joey. We are so happy to have you on with us today. Cell phone use is a problem. We know that. So we know that personally. And then America, Canada, we all know it, right? So we're excited to have you on to talk with us about that. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell our listeners about yourself?
Sure. Yes. And thank you for having me. We were talking a little bit off air. I just love the lack of fear the two of you have when you address topics and issues. And so I'm really, really excited to talk about this, particularly because you just say it like it is. And that's always fun to hear and always fun to be in a kind of lively conversation through it. So bringing the boom and the clap, I like that. But my name is Joey Odom. I am co-founder of a company called Aro. Aro is a company that exists to help families put down their phones, make it easy to put down their phones for a few minutes every day and engage in the real world around them and the real people around them. I've been married for 20 years to my wife, Kristen. For a mental picture for the listener, I'm on the taller side. I'm about 6'5". My wife, Kristen, is just a touch under 5 feet tall. She'll claim 5 feet tall, but there's quite a disparity. So it looks for a long time, especially right when we got out of college, I think it looked like I was just like walking around with my daughter. So I've had to watch that. But we do have, instead of that, we created a daughter. So we have a daughter, Gianna, who's 14, and our son, Harrison, is 16 years old.
Oh, that's awesome. Rita and I, we're not married, but we have quite a height disparity between us as well. I'm 5'11" and Rita's like 5'2", 5'3".
5'3". Rita and I were not married.
That 5'3". Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a funny introduction.
So, I know. I don't know why I even had to bring that up. But when we are going to be in person together one day and like take pictures, either she's going to have to stand on something or I'm going to have to crouch or it's going to look a little ridiculous. So, but that's great.
Well, you're quite a duo.
Anyway, yeah, great to hear about your family and your kids and your passion. I mean, I think a lot of people, maybe their pride would get in the way and say like, my phone use isn't really an issue for me, or I know when to like set those boundaries, etc. And I have been that person too, because I have moments where it's like, oh man, look at the self-control here. But then there's other times where I think I'm going to be self-controlled, but that draw of whatever the heck email it is that I'm waiting for, or whatever it could be, it pulls me in. And with a family, like you said, you have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, I think, right? We have
14
children.
And 16.
14 and 16. Okay. I don't know where I got 12. But we have families as well. I have a 13-year-old. Oh, no, he's 12. I have a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old. It's always so hard for me to remember their ages exactly. And I am becoming acutely aware of the fact that their childhoods are just flying by. I said to Rita the other day, I'm like, I have 4 summers left with my oldest. Like technically 4 summers before he's into that 18 range. And that just makes me like, ugh. And we were actually talking about homeschool because we both homeschool. And like, I have 5 years left with him where it's like, I get to just have this focused time where I'm trying to impart whatever I can to him. And it scares me that the majority of that time is gone and I have this little slice left. And then there's this little box called a phone. And when you work from home, like Rita and I do, I find that particularly tricky, right? Because there's always something. It never goes away, the work that we do. And so we're always waiting to hear from someone or even just talking to each other about what's going to happen on the podcast. So there's always something. There's always something pulling at me. And I don't know. That's just really tricky with the family. And you start to see that time going by. Like, is that something that you can relate to?
Well, yes. And it's just, and I think maybe that's an interesting precursor for the discussion, because I think generally all of us as humans are looking for certainty and we're looking for black and white and we're looking for clarity. And what you just described, and this is your work and this is your job and the things that it adds to your life. And the two of you met on social media. I mean, those are great examples of we kind of have to be willing to wade out into the gray water here. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of gray here. And so what we try to do, and this is where it began for me personally, is that I found through missing my sons, I'll spare you the story. I've told it too many times and it gets me choked up every time. I missed my son's very first soccer goal. And the moment that he scored the goal, he turned to the sidelines to see that I saw it. Right? To see the pride and the smile on my face, but all he saw was the top of my head because I was looking down at my phone. And I realized in that moment that the problem was that I had a relationship with a device. And this device, that relationship was getting in the way of my most important human relationships. I mean, you think about all the things, growing up, you think about the fact, you always think about, oh, what's my partner going to look like? What's my spouse going to look like someday when I meet them? So you think about that, then you get married to them and then you have kids and you all have talked about just like the difficulty in losing a child. So many people lose child or have a hard time getting pregnant. And it's all the stuff you go through for this little miracle to be here with you. And then what's happening over the last 17 years, and it's happened very, very quickly as the smartphones come out, is this thing has gotten in the way of all those great intentions and all the great, wonderful things we want in our lives. And again, it's not, I have an iPhone. I'm not getting rid of my iPhone, but when you look through it through the lens of relationship, and I can go into more on how we've developed this relationship with the device and sneak peek, it's a little weird that we have a relationship with the device. But when you look through the lens of relationship, it is very helpful to prioritize for yourself. Like, okay, like, yes, I have a relationship with this device. And if it's getting in the way of my most important relationships, then I need to do something. So when I missed my son's first soccer goal, that was the first inkling, like, I got to do something about this. And many, many other moments like that to say, I have to do, just to simplify it, I just have to reprioritize my relationships here.
Yeah, you mentioned like we wait to like know the person we're going to get married to, know our children, and then we have a relationship with this device. One thing that's been on my heart for a couple years, and I've talked to Cecily about it many times, and I have yet to talk about it a lot to this audience here, but memories, the way we store memories, I think our phones are really getting in the way of us retaining our own memories of our own children. We're online all the time watching other people's families, like watching this other mom that we've gotten to know on social media and watching her kids, knowing her kids' names, what their first laugh sounds like, what their first time walking looks like. And it's like, how are we going to remember our own children doing those firsts when we've stored up like 15 other moms' kids first? You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And a step further, it's how do we then, it's like our brains can only handle so much on how do we then begin to prioritize those memories. You know, if you're so inundated with first steps, so where does your own child's fall within that hierarchy of first steps? So I haven't thought about it through that perspective of our own memories. There's a very sobering line that as we were launching this business and as we were in the research phase that really hit us like a ton of bricks through one of our researchers is, you know, this generation of kids who are growing up right now, this generation of kids on TikTok and Instagram, their futures really hinge on this, what we do now. It's, you know, they're really going to be at the mercy of what we do and what our decisions are. And when we talk about this, and again, we're wading into the nuanced waters here, is there's no guilt, there's no shame, there's no judgment here. Please, like, don't shut down. Please don't shut down. This is good. This is a hopeful message, but we do have to look at the reality of the situation. We do have to look at what's at stake. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't do something, this generation of kids on Instagram and TikTok will be the very first generation of kids who will die someday having ingested more of other people's memories than creating memories on their own.
Yeah.
So even just one more time, because it's worth hearing that again. If we don't do something, this will be the first generation of kids who will die with more of other people's memories than memories of their own. Yeah. And I know the two of you aren't okay with it. I'm not okay with it. I bet you nobody listening would in their right mind say like, yeah, that's okay. Like, it's not okay. We know that. But because this has come upon us so quickly, 17 years, it's kind of taken us by surprise. And so again, like, we're still learning it here, but we are at a moment in culture. Jonathan Haidt did a masterful job through The Anxious Generation of kind of illustrating this and putting this into good words. But we're at a moment where we say, okay, we see the detriment. We see the fact that it is certainly affecting our kids' memories. It's affecting our memories. I love how you said that because it's so important. And now, okay, what do we do about it? And it's simple and it's complex and it's everything all at once, but I've never heard it in those terms and I love it in those terms, and it's important for us to look at it square in the face so that we can then equip ourselves to do the right thing next.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you guys both totally painted a picture with your words that I think anyone listening could just feel, like, to the core of them. It just creates this pit in your stomach. And like, we can all see it happening. We can all admit to experiencing it to some degree. And you had said earlier that you can talk to us a little bit about how did this relationship with our devices even form. I would love it if we could go back to that. And if you could just walk us through that, because it's so hard to wrap our head around the fact that humans who God placed to, you know, take care of everything, to steward everything, how we could be so easily manipulated by a piece of technology that we created ourselves. So if you could talk us through how this relationship began and why it's so toxic, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And bear with me while I walk through this, because there are a few different layers of it. And the first piece when it comes to a relationship is, as we've said, relationship with our phones, and you've said it, I don't think you nor I nor any of the listeners probably batted an eye when we said our relationship with our phones. But we do have to step back for a moment and say, that's freaking weird that we have a relationship with a device as an adult. Like, that's a bizarre thing. That's a very unique thing as an adult to have a relationship with any inanimate object. You think about the things in your life. You think about my lawnmower at home, for example. I see my lawnmower once a week for about 9 months out of the year, right? I don't have a relationship with this lawnmower. When a conversation gets boring, I don't run out and sneak in a quick mow, right? Like, it's weird that we have a relationship with an object.
Totally.
By the way, I've told that joke a couple times, and there are wives who will come up and they'll say, my husband actually would sneak in a quick mow if a conversation gets boring. So that's not universally true. So forgive me. Maybe some men do have relationships with lawnmowers. Awesome. But it's, and as you dig into that, you realize, yes, this is uncommon for adults to have relationships with objects, but it is not only extraordinarily common, but it is vital for children to have relationships with objects. And we all know what these objects are. They're called transitional objects. Sometimes they're called comfort objects. And they're things like blankies and teddy bears and binkies, right? These are things that children cling to when their parents are gone. Mom leaves the room, you cling to your teddy bear. And what it does for a child is it transitions them from a state of dependence into a state of independence. They realize after a while that, oh, I was holding on to the teddy bear and the teddy bear wasn't doing anything. I can do this on my own. So in other words, what it does is it gives the child a false sense of security in the absence of real relationships. So what are we doing as adults when it comes to our phones? We're clinging to this object that gives us a false sense of security, but we're doing it in the presence of relationships. We're doing it at the dinner table. We're doing it in the middle of a conversation. We're holding on to this thing. We're clinging to this thing. So what this is doing, this relationship with the device, it's reverting us back to a state of childhood. And by the way, all of us are experiencing this, right? And so then you think, okay, well, how did this happen? Like, how do you form a relationship with the device? We form this relationship with the device in the exact same way that we form a relationship with humans. And we do it through, I think, the three defining characteristics of a relationship generally are proximity, interaction, and dependence. Proximity, interaction, dependence. So when you are around another human for an extended period of time, you begin to interact with them more. And as you interact with them more, you become more dependent on them in a good way. You're there, you call them when you need some emotional support. By the way, you all are the exception because you're separate in from a far distance. However, the proximity side, you're proximate even through the virtue of your online interaction, right? So that dependence on a friend becomes a good thing. So and I'm not saying that in a toxic way. So with our phones, it's begun the exact same way. The defining characteristic of our relationship with our phones is the fact that they are with us all the time. And that's not hyperbole. 91% of us have our phones with us 24 hours a day. We don't have to move our feet to reach our phones 24 hours a day. So we're around them all the time. And then when you're around something all the time, what do? You interact with it more. So because our phones are with us, we are constantly interacting with them. And you'll hear people say, like conventional wisdom says, well, just silence your notifications or go on do not disturb and everything's fine. The problem with that is our smartphone interaction is 89% self-initiated. We're the ones that are initiating it. So when I see it there, I will immediately think, well, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? And then I figure out what the weather is. And then the next thing I know, I'm looking at a cat video and then I'm checking sports scores. I'm checking emails and a group text. And so it just goes on. And that interaction only happened by virtue of the phone's proximity to me and me thinking, what do I do? Or, what can I do? What can I look at? And then it goes from there. And then it's gone into the dependence side with our phones. And I'm not saying this necessarily negatively. We do great things with our phones. You all met, like we mentioned, through Instagram. And I FaceTimed with my grandfather several years ago before he passed away when he was in his hospital room. Like, how great is that? Like, these things do really, really good things for us. But that dependence on our phone, the healthy one, what naturally happens over time is that we begin to develop what I call false dependencies on our phone. The reasons why we say we need our phone, but when you take a step back, you realize that you really don't. So the best example I can think of is when you talk about your phones in your bedroom overnight. We all know that blue light before bed will kill our sleep. That's not good for your sleep. It disrupts your sleep 30 minutes before bed, an hour before bed. We all know when you wake up in the morning, if the first thing you do is scroll Instagram, that's going to bring a deluge of information into your brain that's going to set you off on the wrong foot for the day. So the answer is to take your phone out of the bedroom. But when you tell somebody they need to do that, they will tell you they won't because their phone is their alarm clock, right? That's the basic answer. And so let's hold on a second. is that a dependency, an actual dependence on your phone, or is that a false dependency? Have we been lulled into thinking we actually need this thing when we can actually just go to Walmart and buy an alarm clock? So, and as a result of that dependency, those perceived or those false dependencies, what do? We're around it more. So we're back to proximity. And when it's around us more, we interact with it more, then we're more dependent on it. And then we're around it more and interact with it more, then we're more dependent on it. So if you can go to this core relationship, the first domino, and say, I have to break my proximity with this. And I'm not talking about a week-long detox. I'm not talking about a 24-hour detox. I'm talking about a 23-minute time away or 5 minutes for your thoughts and feelings. And you begin to break that proximity, then you will naturally interact with it less. You will naturally become a little bit less dependent on it. When you're a little bit less dependent on it, you won't feel the need to be around it all the time. Then you interact less and you're less dependent on it. So the thesis behind all of that, that's a long monologue to say that we've formed a relationship with the device and we need to really check ourselves and say, is this really what I want? And then we need to examine how we've gotten there. And then beyond it, okay, now what can I do about it? Which goes back to breaking that constant proximity to our phones. Which is, by the way, the most duh thing anybody has ever heard today. Hey, be around your phone less. Like, I realize how that sounds. I realize that's a lot of words to say something very basic. But just like anything in life, the answer is simple, but the implementation can be extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's simple, but it's also mind-blowing. Like, if I think back to how you were describing, like, the childlike dependence really that we have on our devices. It's so true. And I didn't realize how true it was until you started talking about binkies and stuffies, like my daughter, actually, she have really had a habit of sucking her fingers, like ever since she was just brand new. And it took her because with my older two, they had soothers. And so we could just take those away when they reached a certain age. It was not necessarily pleasant for them or us, but at least we could remove them, right? We could not remove her fingers, obviously, right? So she did this for a long time until eventually, we were getting concerned that her oral shape and stuff was changing and took her to an orthodontist and it was confirmed. And so basically it was like, it's now we have to do this. And she was on board, she was old enough to help make the decision. And so to this day, her blankets that she would use every time she sucked her fingers, just as part of relaxing, they're up on our top shelf in our closet. And I don't want to get rid of them because they're special. They're my mom made them and they're sweet and they're wonderful and it's great memories, but they can't, I'm sure now it would be fine, but we had to make it so they weren't near her because she had this really a false dependency on them, like you said. And then to think that we actually really do have the same thing as adults with something else. And I don't know, it's simple, but it's also when you think of it that way, I don't know whether to feel just mind blown or sad or I don't know exactly how to feel. I just know I'm feeling some things about that.
And it's because we've just kind of, and I don't say that this is going to sound like a negative term. I don't mean it negatively. We've kind of thoughtlessly wandered into this relationship with our devices. Right. And that's the thing. It's just normal. Everybody has them. We have homes for everything else in our lives, but for this thing, we just don't have a home. It lives in our pocket, it lives in a purse or wherever it lives. And so as a result, it is just with us all the time. And I don't think it's for ill intent. I don't think it's because we want to phone snub our kids. I don't think it's because we want to ignore our spouses, but the end result is that, and it's because they're strong. This is, I think, one reason why we continue to struggle with this is we have to acknowledge, and it's so easy to say be away from your phone, but we have to acknowledge the difficulty. And when you begin to say okay, this is difficult, which means I got to take some extreme measures here to do something about it. And I think that's why we're still kind of struggling with it, is because we don't quite recognize that we do need to go to the extremes. I'm not talking about getting a flip phone, but we do need to go to the extremes and say, I got to do something, or at least go to very intentional rhythms in our lives in order to get this right, because our relationships depend on it and our kids' futures depend on it for us getting this right.
Yeah. So did you say you're 45? Is that what you said?
I'm 44. I turned 44 on Monday. 44. So I'm
okay.
newly minted 44-year-old. Yeah.
I'm 41. And I'm just wondering, generationally, if you see a difference in the recognition of this as a problem. Because you and I would have grown up like went to high school without phones, like no cell phones really. I think my family got their first cell phone. It was like a family cell phone my senior year of high school. And like I could take it if I was going on a date or something, but otherwise like that was the only time I had it. So for my sister, my youngest sister, who's 7 years younger than me, her upbringing around phones was much different than mine because things advanced very rapidly. So I'm wondering if you see a difference there in how we recognize this as a problem at all.
Yeah. I see a major difference, and I am very again. We have and we're gonna continue to talk about some of the facts about this and kind of the sobering facts about it. But I could not be more encouraged by the way you hear the next generation talk about this, the next generation of parents, and it's because they didn't like how it felt to get phone snubbed by their parents. They didn't like, and we have, you hate to say it, but it's, you've had a generation of kids who have grown up with parents who have looked at screens instead of their eyes. And that sucks. Like that's no fun. And so as a result, they're saying like, I didn't like how that felt and I want to do something about it. I don't know exactly what to do, but I don't want to pass that on to our kids. And then again, the facts and the science and all the stuff's coming out where it's becoming so undeniable. And yes, it is still extraordinarily common to be at a restaurant and see 3-year-olds, mindlessly scrolling through a phone. But I do think that we're hearing more and more from kids and parents. I say kids, the next generation of parents who are saying, I want to do this differently. I got to figure this out. We thought, by the way, when we started Aro, we thought that the target market, the people who would love this would be parents like me who had kids who were in their teenage years. It is for parents and families who have kids who don't have phones yet, because they're saying, I got to get this right. I want to model the way for my kids. I want them to feel, I want the normal for my kids to be my presence with them in the moment. So we're seeing just by virtue of the people who are finding Aro and love Aro, it really is with younger families because they say, I got to get this right very, very early on.
Okay, that's interesting. So kind of like our generation faced a lot of divorce. And so people are going to marriage differently because they experience potentially the detriments of coming from a separated family or split family. So this next generation of parents are dealing with the cell phone issue. That's interesting. So I don't know.
Well, and the intentionality of it too, right? Like it's so easy in life to just choose to not be intentional. And it sounds funny to choose not to be intentional, but it ultimately is a choice, right? To take the easier way. And that's something Rita and I talk about a lot, is just being intentional in our own, like our personal life, just with the choices we make, but intentional with our families. And I think that's what makes it harder when you feel this pull towards this inanimate object, is that you are trying to be so intentional in these areas. And so I was saying to you earlier, like it's easy for me to have willpower in a lot of ways in my life. Like if I'm going to work out or if I'm going to eat healthy or if I'm going to buckle down and get some work done, like that's fine. I can do that. And so when I first came across this concept of let's block the phone away for a while just to remove it from us, I was like, yeah, but I feel like I could do that with willpower. And sometimes I can, like I said, but in general, it's proving that for some reason, this is harder. There's something in it that convinces you this is important. So I don't know. What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's so true. And we talk about willpower a lot. And my little hot take here is that willpower is vastly overrated, is that we are walking around trying to conjure up on a lot of stuff with willpower that we just don't need to. If I were trying to stop eating sweets, I wouldn't carry a Snickers bar in my pocket all day long and just resist it all day long, be an active resistance to this Snickers bar that I want so badly, right? Yeah. So James Clear in Atomic Habits says that environment is always stronger than willpower. Over time, if we are reliant on our willpower, we will lose if our environment is not set up conducively to it. So we need that for it now. And there are some people, we all know this, we all know this when it comes to physical fitness. We know that you can burn calories, and maybe some people don't know this. You can burn calories for free. You can run around your neighborhood. You can do push-ups on your own, and you don't have to pay a nickel. However, most of us, we belong to gyms. A lot of us belong to gyms because we need help One, we've decided that physical fitness is a priority. This is something that I know I need to get. And as a result, I'm going to go to an extreme measure, which is paying to do something you can do for free, to remove the friction of doing that thing because it's difficult. It's hard. It's hard to burn more calories than you consume. We all know that in life experience. And so we do these things so we can get help removing that friction. Maybe it's you go to classes so you have the programming set out for yourself. Maybe you have community at the gym. Maybe it's just like that designated place that has a single purpose of you exercising and burning calories. So we all know that. And so when it comes to our phones, I mentioned this earlier, like this is where I think the scales will begin to tip, is when we start seeing like, okay, this is important enough to have my focus. This is important enough to have my attention. This is important enough for me to take the next step towards doing something rather than relying on my own willpower, removing some of that friction and setting up my environment so that it's conducive to it. So if somebody can, by the way, if somebody can do this on their own with their own willpower, I would highly encourage it. Like I really want that. Like the problem is I'm not that guy. Like we started this business because I needed some help. And so what we've found for people who have come to us is it's people who have tried things. They've tried it on their own and they've said, hey, raise their hand. I need a little bit of help. Can you help me? And that's the person who really this is for. So this thing I told you all before, there's going to be no sales pitch on this. Aro is just for the person who says, I've tried it before on my own and I'm having a hard time doing it and I need some help. And those are the people I think who recognize the difficulty, who really over time, they see the most impact and progress in their lives.
Yeah, I really like that. Remove the friction of doing the hard thing. I mean, we can apply that in so many ways. And that's just a really, really clear way of saying it. So I actually recently read the book Atomic Habits, and I was talking to Rita, and this was before we had booked you to come on, just because another friend of mine had read it. I'm like, oh, that sounds good. And so I read it and it was really good. And again, it's just those simple things like that. It actually leaves you thinking like, oh, why didn't I think of that? But that's the thing. You need other people to sometimes think of these things and write them down or speak them out so that you can hear them and just be like, oh, that makes total sense. So when you created Aro, when you guys created Aro, you said it was largely built around the practices of habit formation. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. It is. Can
you tell us a bit about habit formation?
Sure. And even leading into that, I'd like to draw a little bit of a contrast. And I think this is maybe an aside, but we get kind of caught up on this when we talk about our phones, is that when a lot of people who are on their phones a bunch, the way they describe it, they'll say something and it'll sound very similar to this. They'll say, oh, kind of laugh. I'm just so addicted to my phone. One, as if we would talk about like a meth addiction like that, like, oh, you know me, I can't get away from meth. Like where you kind of lightheartedly joke about the fact that you were addicted to something that's destroying your relationships, right? So people say that, and I think there are a couple things to delve into there. One of them is we're hearing from a lot of smart people who are saying that our relationship to our phones, by the way, I'm going to set aside, there are things, the Candy Crushes and the Instagram algorithm, all that stuff, there are addictive characteristics to that, no doubt. So I'm talking about the general relationship with our phone. The vast majority of us do not have a clinical addiction to our phone. And the characteristics share a little bit more of compulsive behavior than addiction. And the reason why this is important, I think, is that when you have an addiction, when you say you have an addiction, there is an implied sense of resignation to that addiction. In other words, there's nothing I can do about it. That's kind of what you're saying. You know, the end of that is like, I'm so addicted to my phone and there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm not even going to try, is kind of what we're saying, right? We're giving ourselves a free pass. But if you look at this object, and especially when you talk about addiction, you go through a 12-step program. What's the very first step? Is you saying, I am powerless over this thing. However, when you call it a habit, when you call something a habit, something changes. In fact, I kind of sat up straight when I just said habit, because I realized with a habit, oh, I can do something about a habit. I have agency over a habit. I don't have to admit powerlessness over this thing. Like I can actually do something with it. So we believe not just scientifically that this looks like a habit that we have in our lives, but even for ourselves and our own sense of self-talk, the way we're talking to ourselves about it, let's just call it a habit because we have agency over a habit. And a habit begins, that Charles Duhigg talked about this in his book that predated Atomic Habits, the habit loop, and James Clear talks about it some too. It begins with a cue that leads to a routine that crescendos in a reward. So we have based the RO system all around that. Is the RO platform, by the way, is for families to help make it easy to put down your phone. It's not a lockbox. It's for you to build healthy rhythms to make it easy for you to put down your phone so that it's not abnormal for you to be away from your phone. So the RO app will send nudges around dinner time, for example, that'll say, hey, why don't you have a family dinner? And so you see that, and there's that cue for you. And you say, okay, like I'm gonna lead to a routine. I'm gonna do an RO flip session, flip my phone over. And by the way, when you go into an RO session, whether it's an RO flip session that doesn't require a box or anything, or if you use the RO box and you put it in there, RO begins quantifying the amount of time that you're distant from your phone. So it's kind of the opposite of Apple Screen Time, where it says, here's how much time you're on your phone. This says, how much time you are distant from your phone, which is a powerful motivator, much more than the other side of it.
Yeah.
So that routine, and then that leads to a reward. And the reward is interesting. The RO system is built kind of all around the reward system and kind of using those tips and tricks that the social media companies have used to keep us on our phones. So building streaks and all that kind of stuff. So there's a reward system and badges, but the real reward when you're away from your phone is the life that happened on the other side of it, right? It's what did you do with your time? What was that conversation you had with your daughter? What was that moment you had with your spouse on a walk? What was that watching a movie without a second screen with your son and just laughing your heads off? Like, that's the good stuff, right? And so we've built this all around the science of habit formation, also because I don't believe these lock boxes, for example, I don't know that restriction actually helps you build a muscle towards something. It's not voluntary. It's just kind of like it's punitive. It's not voluntary. And when something is voluntary, because I want my kids, my son's in 10th grade, my daughter's in 9th, when they go off to college, I want them to have a pre-existing good relationship with their device that is on their own, good rhythms in their life, so that they can then sustain that when they're in college or when they're out of college or when they're on a date or when they're out with friends. So that's one reason why we've approached it, and we have found it extraordinarily effective to look at it through that lens, because it gives somebody a personal sense of agency over their actions.
Something I love about all of the sponsors that we've worked with is that they all share our values. Pure Anada is no exception. I love that this company was created by a homeschool mom over 20 years ago who has grown this incredible family business. She started it because she became aware of all the toxins in personal care products and she wanted a healthier alternative for her family. If you guys are new to thinking about that, it is something that's so important. In conventional products, there are parabens, phthalates, false fragrances, all sorts of microplastics and things that can completely disrupt our hormonal system, our endocrine system. So it's extremely important to find healthier alternatives. Pure Anada is exactly that. They have such a wide range of cosmetics and skincare that truly work extremely well. And the best part about it, well, I don't know if it's the best part because there's so much that's great about them, but something that's really fantastic is that they're 100% natural while still being affordable. And that is a really rare thing. And I think that's, it really speaks to their integrity as well. And another excellent thing is that they offer free shipping on all orders over $75 within Canada and the United States, which is absolutely amazing. So be sure to check them out, pureanada.ca. You will not be disappointed. Yeah, so the habit formation is super interesting. And something that you had said to me in an email is that you guys really built this all around relationships and prioritizing the ones that matter. So, I mean, I just feel extremely convicted of the fact, like I said at the beginning, like we have a set amount of time when our children are children. We have a set amount of time where we're married to our spouse. We have a set amount of days on this physical earth. And I guess the question I would pose, not just to you, but to literally everyone listening is like, what are you not willing to do in order to make those super important relationships so that it's not just like a spoken priority, but it's like, here's something I am doing to put action to the words that I'm saying so that I don't look like a hypocrite to you, my child, looking at me with your sweet, innocent eyes, you know?
It is so true. And I think taking a step is so important, because then here's what happens. And this is, again, back to James Clear again on Atomic Habits. He talks about identity-based habits. And identity-based habits are when you call yourself something, even if you're not that. So let's just say that I haven't worked out in years, but instead of saying I'm going to go work out this week, I said I am an athlete. What if I just said I am an athlete? So what happens? All of a sudden, you begin to do the things that an athlete does. What if I said, I've done this thing to get my phone use under control because I know how important it is. I am a present dad. I am an intentional father. When my kids want my attention, they get it. When my wife is talking to me, my eyes are locked on hers, right? So if we begin to identify that ourselves that way, it's almost like we become more like the person we say we are, or the one that we aspire to be. And so you begin to take steps towards that, and you start placing bets on yourself, and you become, all of a sudden, just by using that as your identity, you're kind of taking steps towards that. The reason we started Aro was really for us, was for two reasons. The first one was I just wanted to model good behavior for my kids. They didn't have phones yet, so I wanted to model for them what a good relationship looks like. And the second one is basically I just wanted to look back without regrets. I didn't want to look back and have regrets for them as they got older, and that makes sense, but things have gotten real for, I watched my son. I told you earlier, my son drove to school with my daughter on Wednesday of this week. And that's the first time he's driven to school. And I had this realization, he has 2 more first days of school. He's got 2 more, like, oh my gosh. So this whole idea is when we started was to not live with regrets and model good behavior. Now it is a natural response to me to, I can't afford to have my phone with me. I can't afford to keep it with me. I can't afford to phone snub anybody. I can't afford to have a dinner table, because these moments are fleeting. I mean, you hear the line, Sandra Stanley says this line a lot. She says when your children are young, the days are long, but the years are short. And I'm sure a lot of people probably heard that. But for me, as who has no longer kids who are young, but as they're a little bit older, is that truth in that line has changed a little bit. So now the days are short and the years are short. And so I got to make most of the days. Like I got the days, like you can count them down, and you hear all the statistics about, we've spent 90% of the time we'll ever spend with our kids by the time they're 18. We've spent 75% of the time we'll ever spend with our kids by the time they are 12. Sorry, Cecily. I know I just freaked you out there.
The whole 12 years old thing is just
that's sobering, right?
Yes, it is.
It's painful. So I say all of that to say, like, my motivation now has kind of shifted beyond the modeling, because my kids have phones now and I've modeled it pretty well up to this point. And it's shifted, kind of a hypervigilance on not having a regret, but even more so, it's just because I want to be with them and I don't want to miss a moment. I can't afford to miss a moment. The stakes are so high and I can't afford to get it wrong.
Absolutely. So by the time that this episode comes out near the end of September, it'll be a few weeks ago that we had Mark Clark on. He's a pastor. And something that he talks about in some of his sermons is God has given us our time, talent, treasure, and tent. So it's like 4 T's, right? Time, talent, treasure, tent, which is our body, our dwelling, right? And it's just something to think about. Like our families, our time, all of this is something that God has entrusted to us. And I don't know. I also think of the parable of the talents in the Bible, where this is one of my favorite passages, where these servants are all given a certain amount. 2 of them go off and invest it, and it multiplies, and one just kind of buries it in the ground. And I think in that parable, so often people are talking about the perspective of fear, right? But I think it can also be true for, we'd rather seek comfort, or we'd rather just not take that chance, or just, like I said, pursue our own comfort instead. And I'm convicted by that, just from the Christian perspective for our Christian listeners out there.
Well, I actually think this opens up an interesting opportunity for the church, Cecily. I think the church has an opportunity. The church, by the way, all throughout history has always led. The church has always led culture, and we've become, in a way, and this is not disparaging us, is we've become a little bit less relevant in culture than we have, and we haven't led in a good way. And I think when it comes to technology, we have an opportunity right now to lead culture. And I believe the church should be leading culture when it comes to technology, that we should be adopting this within our homes. We should be talking about it from the pulpit and what we can do. And in that vein, we have partnered up with a pastor named Dr. Darren Whitehead. He's the pastor of Church of the City in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's through Think Media, which is Gabe and Rebecca Lyons. And so we have come together to say, let's mobilize the church to lead this. And so here in the U.S., with all the noise of the election throughout this year, what if we started 2025 with silence and with reflection and with quiet? And what if the church, capital C, among a lot of churches, went through a 28-day digital fast together, where we dumbed down our phones and where we quantified the amount of time we're away from our phones? And so churches all throughout the U.S., and heck, we can include Canada too, for sure, we are mobilizing around this, and churches are getting involved to say, I want my congregation to go through this. So I mentioned that because I think it is very applicable. This is an amazing opportunity for the church to lead. And if people are listening who are pastors, or if people who go to church and they'd like their church to be part of this, I'd love for people to go to digitalfast2025.com. It's digitalfast2025.com and fill in the intake form. Send us a note, and we'll get with you. And we'd love to get your church involved. That'll go through. Every participant gets a book, the digital fast. It gets a workbook as well, and then you will get access to the Aro app during the time of your fast, so that you can be with others doing the same thing, so that the church can lead, and so that others can look at the church as the city on a hill and say, they're getting it right. I want to be part of that.
Yeah, I love that. And what a powerful thing it is, or could be, to do that so communally, right? That's something I think that we could all agree that technology has done, is it has removed a lot of the communal aspects. And we can try to argue against that, but I feel like especially post-COVID, it's become really easy to just segregate and to be lured into this false sense of community. But there's something so powerful when Christians agree on something and act on that together, especially in a fasting sort of way. Like, to see what God can and will do through something like that is a very exciting thought. Love that idea.
I totally agree. We are very excited, and I do think it's the church's moment. I think it's for us to do together and lead culture, lead our families, lead the next generation. It's a pretty cool opportunity for all of us.
And what makes it really cool too is I think that the secular world is craving the same thing, right?
Yes.
Maybe not for exactly the same reasons. We may have different reasons that we believe this is important, but they're not going to disagree, right? They have those same feelings inside themselves that something is so desperately wrong with the way we're doing life in this way. So I feel like you're right. It's an incredible opportunity for the church to be the city on a hill. Really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to go back to the leading the next generation line for a second and modeling, because I think I just saw an article the other day talking about the psychological damage of phones and social media for children and adolescents in particular, as their brain is kind of developing and everything. But I never I watch these people online talk about this, and myself talk about, I don't want my kids to have a phone yet, but then I don't hear anybody talk about the adult relationship with a phone, except for in this conversation, and so
acceptance.
Yeah, it's just we want our kids to be held off on having a phone, but don't worry about us, we're cool. And so I just want to hammer that modeling part just a little bit more, if you will.
Oh, Rita, you just nailed it. You really did. It's so easy to look at this problem and blame, and we are in the blame game, and it's our spouse's problem and it's our kid's problem. But the only thing that will change this is if we begin to look internally first. Because, and we encourage, we talk the kind of the guiding principle for someone as they're wanting to take this seriously. We talk about start and stop. And so I'll begin. What you're addressing is the start. And the start is start with yourself. And by the way, that's the most unsatisfying answer that anybody could possibly hear when it comes to this. But this is how this gets solved, is if we start with ourselves and we look at ourselves first. Because the model of parenting with smartphones over the last 17 years has followed what we call the 3 M's. So we as parents, we model a bad relationship with our phone for whatever reason. I have an important work email, or that's why I needed the phone. We phone snub our kids when they're trying to talk to us. We keep it with us during a family movie. Whatever our rationalization, we are modeling a bad relationship with our phones. And then we give our kids a phone someday, what if they're 12, 14, 16, 18, whatever number that is. We give our kids a phone one day, and what do? Well, of course, they mimic what we have modeled to them. So there's the second M. They just mimic what we modeled to them. And of course they do. People just replicate what is normal in their life. But then we do something that's absolute lunacy. This is crazy what we do with the third M, is we have the audacity to get mad at our kids for mimicking what we modeled to them. And it doesn't make any sense, but we begin to point the finger like, why don't you ever talk? You're always on your phone. Hold on a second. Where do we think they learned that? And so again, there's no shame. There's no judgment. We just got to look at this as a fact. This is how things work. Like the number one predictor, and this is something that I would love. Here's another soundbite for somebody today. The number one predictor for your child's future phone use is your current phone use. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's the number one predictor. You look at smoking as an example. Smoking is the best historical example we have of this, is that we all kind of knew that smoking was bad for us, but it became, until we realized that the secondhand smoke was damaging our kids' lungs, that's when something changed. And so from when they began tracking adult smoking to now, adult smoking to date, adult smoking is down 78%. Now, they also began tracking, a few years later, they started tracking kids smoking in adolescence. So kids smoking, adolescent smoking, from when they begin tracking it to today is down, I'll give you a guess, it's also 78%.
Really?
The exact same percent decline in smoking in adolescents as smoking in adults. So What should that tell us? And by the way, this doesn't just go for phones. Kids will naturally, all of us, whatever we feel like is normal, we'll just replicate that. Mm-hmm. So if we're not modeling this well, and so here's the good news on it, if we're not modeling it well, then that's a real problem. But the good news is this is an opportunity, because if we model a great relationship with our phones, that we put them down at dinner, or when our child's talking to us, we go remove them from the situation and look at them. Or if we're on a date night with our spouse, we put our phones away and we actually sit and engage with each other. We can model a great relationship. And then someday our kids will mimic that great relationship. And then we can make memories and make magical moments and any other cool M you can think of with that third M. That's but cool. It begins always with starting with ourself. And here's a question for everybody to ask yourself. Are you modeling a relationship with your phone that you want your kids to mimic someday? Because they will. So that's a question for all of us, and only you can answer that for yourself. I'm not judging you. You're just taking an assessment of yourself and be honest with yourself. And if the answer is no, good news. There are a few things you can do that will make a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah.
It's really good.
It's very good. I don't know. I was telling Cecily yesterday, maybe, or the day before, that this is such an important conversation from the standpoint of, we have AI here. We have augmented reality here. It's here right now. And we're moving into that AI generation. That's what our kids are going to grow up in. And we're just now starting to figure out, hey, maybe our phones, like maybe our smartphone's a problem, and now we've already got something else on the cusp, that we're trying to deal with. And we're just now figuring out this problem over here. So things are moving really quickly, and we need to start moving more quickly mentally about how we're dealing with the things that are coming into our life. Otherwise, we're going to keep backpedaling and trying to fix everything,
Absolutely.
as it's coming at us.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, that's the problem with so many, and I don't want to sound like such an old lady, but I'm going to I guess this is the only way I can say it. It's the problem with so many advancements is that often we embrace it before we've actually figured out how to deal with it, right? And that's absolutely what we're experiencing with so many things. I mean, medically, technologically, and just in so many ways. And it breaks my heart, because people have been doing this since honestly the dawn of humanity. We've been just like embracing that big next thing and running towards it with like arms wide open, and then spending the next generation trying to like undo the damage before absolutely making a bigger mess of something else again. It's just like, it's kind of a depressing thing to just realize that we just, I'm so fun, aren't I? That we just have this tendency to screw up like this. And as parents, I guess that's just why we feel it so acutely. It's because we just want to do it differently, right? Yeah. Which actually, that brings me to my next question. I was listening to your interview, one of the interviews that you did with Ginny of 1,000 Hours Outside. We love Ginny. Clearly, you love Ginny as well. She's so great. Yes. But in that one, you actually talked about the name Aro and what it means. So can you talk about that? Because I was like, man, I'm going to remember that. And I already forget what it means, but I remember how much I loved it. So can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I love that question. Aro is a word that's not familiar to most of us. It was not familiar to us when we stumbled upon it. But Aro is a term from the Maori culture. And Aro is a term that I think really encompasses the life that we want people to experience and that is possible for them. Aro is a term that means to notice. Aro means to turn towards, to take heed. And there's nothing really inspirational or motivational, let's be honest, about putting down your phone. Why would we do that? Our phones are awesome, like all the cool things we can do on it, unless we realize that what's on the other side of it is so compelling and it's so beautiful if we could actually notice it and if we turn towards it. I mean, even like the whole concept of turning towards, you think about in our marriages, the Gottman Institute has a study that came out that said that successful couples who remain married turn towards, they specifically said that, turn towards their partner's bids for emotional connection 86% of the time, while couples who don't make it only turn towards their partner's bids for emotional connection 33% of the time. Wow. We are physically and emotionally unable to turn towards those subtle bids for emotional connection when we're holding our phone. So putting down your phone, that's meaningless. I don't really care about that. I do care about what's on the other side. And I know that thing is the impediment, that every good thing I want in life will be limited by my relationship with my phone. So that's what that's what we want. And by the way, that's what we know is possible. There's no, I mean, I'm the chief of sinners here. Like there's nobody, we had to start a business because I was so bad at this, right? Like that's how badly I needed it. But I can tell you, and I'll tell a quick story about that for people who are thinking like, I'm so far gone, or this won't work, or man, I'm beating myself up, or the mom guilt sets in, or whatever it is. So this just is a story. When my daughter Gianna was 9 years old, we were watching a movie, and this was, I read it I have a 5-year journal, so I read it in my journal the other day. It was May 8th, 2020. We watched a movie together. She's 10 years old. We finished the movie, and she turns toward me, and she doesn't say this line with any judgment, and she doesn't say it with any congratulations. She made a statement of fact. She goes, Dad, I can tell that Aro's working because this is the first time that we've watched a movie and you haven't had your phone. Now, that was a gut punch in some ways, but on the other side, it was like, I did a pretty good job. Like that made me feel pretty good about myself. I couldn't wait till the next time we watched a movie for me to, put down my phone. I couldn't wait for that. So I told Gianna this story a few months ago after I read it in my journal. It's 4 years later. She's 14 now. And I said, do you remember that? And she laughed. And she said, Dad, that would be so weird if you had your phone during a movie now.
So good.
So think about the normal that can change, because our kids' brains, their sweet little brains, they're neuroplastic. You said earlier, they're just constantly adapting. They're observing, adapting. And they're just normalizing. Their sweet little brains are just adjusting to whatever we say is normal to them. So if you think you've gone too far, I promise you haven't. I promise you can get this right. I promise you can take steps to get this right. And it's not going to happen overnight, but you can take steps today. And then 4 years later, your teenage daughter in the most formative years of her life will turn to you and say, Dad, in other words, what she was saying was, Dad, you're always with me. Dad, you're present with me. And this is no pat on my back. This is coming from the depths of messing this up, to understanding that. And so if people feel like, this is so big and heavy, I promise you the world can look different. And that's what we want somebody to do, to tie it all the way back to Aro. Aro is for you to notice, and it's for you to turn towards, and you to take heed and have that hope. Just hold that little hope inside that life is possible. And I will promise you today that it is.
That's so good. And I mean, as parents, aren't we all just so thankful for that neuroplasticity? Because Maybe it's not this. Maybe this isn't your struggle. Maybe it's something else, and just to have that hope that it's like, okay, we can change this and we can turn things around. And I'm glad you said the bit about, being the chief of sinners. And I think we can all relate to that, right? But right before you said that, I had actually just been thinking about, I had already brought this to a bit of a depressing spot about 5 minutes ago, and I'm going to just go for it again. But
do it.
I think we just really need to come to the very real realization that having this dependency on our phones is sin. We are turning to it in sin, right? We're looking for comfort from something that is not God. We are choosing to turn away from the hard things to choose what's easy. And when we think about that, that is sin. And so I really just love Aro, meaning turn towards, because when I think of the word repent, right? Repent means to turn away from.
Wow.
And I mean, doesn't that just lead so beautifully into turn toward? Like if we're turning away from something, if we're turning away from our sin, what are we then turning toward? I just think that is so cool.
You just blew my mind. That is fantastic. Absolutely. And what's funny? I had never ever heard somebody describe that as sin. You were the second person this week, and the first person was a very prominent pastor who I was on the phone with, and he goes, "Bro, I gotta," and we were friends. I know him fairly well. He goes, "I gotta confess some sin to you." And I was expecting some big admission of drinking too much or or anything else, and he just said, I'm on Instagram too much." And he recognized that and called that out as sin because it was getting in the way of something else. And it's almost like, I almost think about when they talk about drunkenness in the New Testament, Paul says that he refers to drunkenness, but what he says is a drunkenness which leads to debauchery. So it's like, that's the open gate towards something else. And so we're talking about our phones. It's not necessarily the excess amount of time, but what is it leading to? What is it what is it getting in the way of? What are the other things we could have experienced around us, but we can't because of that? So what's it leading to? And I love the idea of repentance, of turning away. And by the way, it's walking away from something. It's a lot more motivational to walk to something. So knowing that you're both, to your point, which I love, and I'm absolutely going to steal, which is you're walking away from something and you're turning towards something all at once, something that's so much more beautiful. It reminds me of the C.S. Lewis, where he talks about we're just far too easily pleased. And I think that we are far too easily pleased as a society with all the stuff that's on our phone, when the real world, when he says a holiday at the sea is being offered to us, that we can be in real life and be compelled by the beauty of the things around us and the people around us. Like that's living. Like that's the life that I want to live. That's the life that everybody wants to live. And so then what do? We just put on some proper boundaries in our lives so that we then can go live that life.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually done a whole episode and we called it Making Mud Pies in a Slum.
Oh, no way.
Because we love to go through essays and writings. And I think we've done a couple of C.S. Lewis. And I mean, I don't want to make mud pies in a slum anymore. You know what I mean?
So good. Love it.
I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I have really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Like a lot. You're really fun to talk to and passionate about what you do because it's important. It is important. So
thank you.
Did you know during the coronavirus years, poison control centers saw a 20% jump in calls related to cleaning products? This is because of the bleach, all-purpose cleaners, antibacterial cleaners that people were using around their homes. And regardless of your fear during that time and your increase in cleaning, a lot of people just in general use these products around their home. And not only are they bad for you to potentially ingest, but they also are absorbing into your skin. Your skin is an organ. This is where Rocasa Organics comes in. They have cleaning products with natural organic ingredients that you can pronounce, that you know what they are, and they are safe for you and your family to use. You can feel comfortable using them. They also have lotions and soaps and just a wide array of products that you can use in your home. I know our house has Rocasa in basically every room now. So go to rocasaorganics.com and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 20% off your first order.
People are probably hearing this and saying like, oh, great. Like, now what? So can I give a little bit of a now what for people?
So I have one little question, and then I want you to do the whole now what.
Yes, I love it.
It made me think of practicality. And so one very practical question that I had, and just something that's a bit of a holdup in my own life with this, is my camera as my phone as my camera. So there's lots of times where it's like, I don't want to have this thing near me. But at the same time, I also want it as a camera for those moments that just happen randomly in a day that you don't even know are coming. And so this might be like the whole alarm clock thing, like just buy a camera. But I don't know. Do you have something to say to that? And then the whole now what? Because I think that's kind of connected.
I love the camera question. And by the way, I don't know that that's a false dependency. That's a very real thing, because I'm not going to carry around a disposable camera, and I'm not going to go develop film. I'm just not going to, right? Like you have digital cameras and all that stuff. I'm just not going to carry around another device. So that is a great question, and it's super, super valid. And I think the awareness of it is important. It's very, very important, because you are going to need that. There's going to be a question for you at times. And I know we're talking about your kids, but just illustratively, would you rather take a picture of the sunset or be in the sunset, right? It's just a little bit of a constant awareness for you of like, okay, is this really a picture moment or is it not?
Right.
And this won't work when, if you're not with your partner, but one little hack that I love, particularly when you're with your partner, is do a phone swap.
Okay.
I'm not going to get buried in my wife's phone. Right. She's not going to get buried in my phone. And so if we could do a phone swap, then we'll actually go to the utility of just using it as a camera.
That's interesting.
So my wife and I, we go on a walk every night. And so just in case, we bring her phone, I leave my phone at home, we bring her phone and I hold it, right? So that's a little hack that I have found is very effective. If you're on vacation, for example, a phone swap, in my opinion, is super, super helpful. And you can do that with friends. You can do that on a date night. So that's one. But this is another one of those that, we're just out in the gray waters here. And there's no perfect answer for that. It is going to begin with awareness. You may find over time as you build this muscle, and I call it building a muscle very specifically, that you're going to say, I'm good. You know what I mean? But very valid question. I totally get it. There's no perfect answer. And you could begin to do a couple environmental things like the phone swap that really will make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Now what for the rest of it? Yeah.
Well, I mentioned the guiding principle for how to address this. I mentioned start, stop. So the start I gave you, which is start with yourself. And the second piece is stop at nothing to get it right. Is that this is a battle worth fighting. This is something worth planting a flag and saying, nope, this is my fight right here. And this is something I'm in. And if you fail, let me just actually warn you, you are going to fail. You are going to mess up. But if I were working out at the gym and I were trying to do a bench press and I couldn't lift one of them up, I wouldn't quit weightlifting forever. Right? I would, the next day, I would get back in the weight room. I would start working out again. And so that's okay. Think of this as building something that's not going to build immediately, but will build over time. So stop at nothing. Take an extreme measure. And again, as I've told you, this is not a sales pitch, but just go download the Aro app. Just go download. There's a free trial for you. You can see if it's for you. If it is, amazing. If it's not, that's fine. But take a definitive step in that direction. But for today, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 3 things that you can begin today that cost nothing, that you can implement today, and pick one of them. Let's start small. So the very first thing, and there are 3 S's. The first one is I want you to spend an hour away from your phone a day, an hour physically distant from your phone a day. Now, for many of you, we said 91% of people have their phones with them 24 hours a day. So the likelihood is you don't do this right now, which means it might be a little bit hard. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. Spend 5 minutes away from your phone, physically distant from your phone today. Now, if you get 5 minutes down, tomorrow, do 6 minutes. And then the next day, do 7 minutes and build it slowly. Think of this as a journey over time, is building slowly, is spending little bits of time away from your phone. And by the way, when you do that, you join the 9% club of people who spent time away from their phone that day. If you're already doing an hour, do an hour and a half, do 2 hours, keep building that up. So that's one, is just get in that rhythm and habit of physical distance from your phone. So spend 1 hour physically distant from your phone. The second one applies to the home, is I want you to establish sacred times and sacred places that are phone free. So just think of your home, and I'll give you an easy one. Let's think of the dinner table to start. The dinner table, this is sacred. And there's some real power. There's a real power in not saying no phone zone, but in saying sacred. That means, ooh, hold on, that's immovable. That you don't violate that one, right? That is sacred. Here's a great one for parents, especially with young kids. What if their room became a sacred place where your phone just never enters? When you're in there, you are locked in with them. What if a sacred time would be a date night with your spouse? What if you just didn't even, I'm going to scare some people, what if you didn't even bring your phone into the restaurant? And what if one of you did, the other one held it? So establish sacred times and sacred places where the phones just never go. And then the third one is my favorite. And so the third one is kind of the art, not the science. And the third one is simply for you to search for moments of connection. And let me elaborate on that. What that means is we have all these opportunities throughout the day where we can connect. And I want you to start looking for those cues and just be an investigator and search for those. And it may look something like this. To give an example of my daughter, if Gianna came home and she said, Dad, I had a really bad volleyball practice. Or if my son said, oh man, I'm really struggling in history. Or if my wife said, you won't believe what happened today in traffic. Or, oh, I got to tell you a funny story or anything like that. So that's a moment for connection, and you can miss it if you're not looking for it. But if you're looking for it, and if you see it, here's what I want you to do. I want you to say what I believe are the 6 most powerful words in the English language in a relationship in 2024. That's going to sound real simple. You just say, let me put down my phone. Oh, let me put down my phone. Oh, I want to hear this. Let me put down my phone. Say it almost in passing, and then go physically remove your phone from the situation. If you have an RO box, drop it in the RO box. If you have a drawer, which I bet you do, put it in a drawer or throw it on the couch or something, get it away, and then sit down and lock eyes. And I'll tell you what that does. That communicates something so powerful to the person on the other side of it. And here's what it says to them. It says, hey, there are 8 billion people on this earth who can theoretically reach me on my phone. Guess what? You are more important than every single one of them. So let's think about that. What does that do for my 14-year-old daughter? It's hard to be a teenage girl. What does that do for her the next time maybe she feels being bullied or mean girl stuff? Or what does that do the next time when she starts doing some body comparison that can be so catastrophic for a young brain, for any brain? What does that do for her? It says to her, wait a second, this is hard. She has a foundational sense of value and she says, I know if everything else goes wrong, I know my dad loves me because I've seen his eyes locked on mine. What does that do for my son, a young man who wants to become a good man? What does that do for my wife? What does that do for our relationship? What does that do for the intimacy in our marriage? The intimacy that we walk around with, the lack of intimacy in our marriages, and we think that it's too far gone. But what if you took that step today? What if you took that step and just saw what happened? She may be completely baffled by what's happening. It may take some time. She may think you're trying to trick her because she's been hurt time after time after time. What if you did that every single day? And that eye contact and telling her that she's important, not just through your words, but through your action. What would that do for your intimacy in your marriage? And I'm telling you this, everybody listening, this is possible today. You don't have to buy a box for this. You don't have to subscribe to an app for this. This is accessible. It's available to you right now. And I just promise you, this will make all the difference for you. This will make all the difference for your relationships. This will make all the difference for your kids' futures.
So good. And just as you're wrapping that up, like the words that came to my mind were just walk in freedom, right? Walk in freedom. Don't submit to this yoke of slavery, this modern yoke of slavery that's being put upon us by our own choices, right? It's our own choices that's doing it. So walk in freedom. That's what God has promised us. And I feel like I just appreciate your passion so much. You're not just a businessman. You're just a man who believes in this message, right? You've seen the damage that it's caused and you're part of the solution. So I just appreciate that.
That's nice. Thank you. It is one of our core values at Aro is just believe, is just having that deep belief in the things you don't see. We're crazy enough to think that we might just help create an entire generation of intentional families. And that takes a little bit of craziness to believe it. And it takes a lot of passion. And we believe that it's going to happen. And I believe that everybody listening here will be part of that.
Yep. Amen to that.
Very
Amen.
Good. Very good.
Well,
thank you for coming on with us. No, I don't. I just really appreciate you coming on with us in this conversation. I think it's a very important one, like I said earlier. So if you could tell our listeners where they can find you, I think you kind of already have some where they can find Aro, but where they can find you and more about Aro.
Absolutely. Would love that. People can follow us at Instagram at GoRONow. You can check us out on our website, GoRO.com. I'd love for people to mention to check out digitalfast2025.com. And if there's anything you do today, just go. We would love for you to just try. Just download the app. It's a 7-day free trial to see if it's a good fit for you. Just go download the RO app, wherever you get apps, ARO, on the Google Play Store or on the App Store, and just give it a try. And yeah, we're cheering for everyone here. And Cecily and Rita, I've been looking forward to this conversation and so glad we had it. And thank you for the truth that you're bringing to the world through the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This conversation with Joey is all about the relationships we have with our phones and how, if we're not intentional about it, that relationship can get in the way of our more important human family relationships. So if you want to try the solution that Joey and Aro have created, you can try their app by going to goaro.link/boomclap. That's goaro.link/boomclap. All right, what a great and convicting conversation that was with Joey. I'm really excited to put into practice some of the very simple things that he spoke to us about. One thing that I really liked was the 3 M's that he told us about, which was we model a bad relationship, then our kids mimic what we have modeled, and then we get mad for mimicking, that our kids are mimicking what we modeled. And I mean, I'm not just talking about in phone use. I'm talking about in so many things. This is the case, right? We see ourselves in our children, and that's the hardest thing sometimes, right? So super thankful that he took the time to have this conversation with us. Don't forget to check him out. We will include his links below, as well as the links where you can find us outside of the podcast. We would so appreciate it if you leave us a review or just click the stars. It can be really easy. Or share the episode with a friend or a family member. This is a really easy way for you guys to support the podcast that doesn't cost you anything except just a few moments of your time. And we would be incredibly grateful. Reminder that next week we're having an election conversation. Those are always really fun to have. But like we said at the beginning of this podcast, this is a topic that's important and has some urgency behind it. I would argue that the election conversation is the same. It's an important conversation. It has some urgency behind it. Because time is short with that as well. So make sure you know where your values are and how you're voting. So thank you, as always, for listening to the BOOMCLAP podcast, where culture and conviction collide.